Yeah, good morning. This is video 18 of the Tulip Airway series. We're talking about starved elective anaesthesia today. I've spoken about the role of Tulip in emergencies. I've spoken how it's useful in out of hospital airway management and how it's prevented cricothyrotomy at least 3 occasions. But today we want to talk about the bare bones. So we're specifically speaking about starved elective anaesthesia. We're not going to be addressing the emergency airways or the trauma or the full stomach or the resus side of things. So this is about elective lists, the day job. Okay, so these situations whereby the patient's usually starved and prepared. It's an elective list, and therefore patients are theoretically low risk, and the ones that aren't, you'll kind of already know. But airway decisions still matter, even though it's not an emergency. So let's define that problem. Okay. Starved elective anaesthesia sits on its own effectively. The patient is fasted. The risk of aspiration is usually low, and if it's high, you've already made an appropriate plan. But the risks are not zero, right? But the problem is we then move straight on into kind of default tools that actually carry their own risks. And I'll give you an example. All right, this is a study I've quoted before. This is about how 25% of laryngeal masks cause passive regurgitation when compared to a Goodell airway because they anatomically open, physically open the entry of the esophagus, allowing passive regurgitation. This was proven by Barker and Langton in this paper. I think it was a long time ago, but 92 or something. But basically the regurgitation is shown to be around 25% with those who have ingested a gelatin capsule containing methylene blue dye. That was then confirmed by laryngoscopy and conventional laryngoscopy in the two groups, presenting a result of basically 25% of laryngeal masks cause passive regurgitation. The Goodell causes none, which is interesting because clearly it doesn't sit in the esophagus and open the esophagus for gastric drainage. Now that then concludes that the laryngeal mask is worse for regurgitation than a Goodell face mask, and effectively a Tulip is in the same anatomical location as a Goodell and the Goodell, slightly bigger and slightly larger, but still within the oropharynx, so it doesn't physically open the esophagus. So LMA aerogels are, they've transformed anesthesia. They're good pieces of kit, and we've used them for a long time. But essentially, there are a couple of problems with them. One, their size. Two, the fact that they can cause regurgitation just because of their physical structure. But also, there's that problem of intermittent seal quality. When I first started as an anaesthetist, one of the first things I remember is that an LMA leaked, and I had to be taught to just squeeze gently. In other words, keep your positive pressure values low, otherwise they leak, and they do that in and around 20 to 25 in almost every situation. The Tulip avoids this. The Tulip is seated in the oropharynx, has a circumferential oropharyngeal seal that's total. If it leaks, you just inflate it and it stops. So behind the tongue is where most of our airway problems actually exist, isn't it? So let's talk about what I call a bridge to safety philosophy. Okay, it is essentially smarter to do less, because what you need to do for starved elective anesthesia is not more. You just need to do enough, maintain the physiology, but not more than is necessary. That's never a great idea. So presenting the solution as the Tulip. Now, basically, the Tulip is completely different. As I've said before, the Tulip is a mutation. It's not derived from a Goodell or an LMA or an iGel. Like Copa was derived from a Goodell, an iGel was derived from an LMA, but a Tulip is completely different. It's seated anatomically within the oropharynx, and it's a cuffed airway that fills that, and that's completely new. But the tongue is the only thing that obstructs, unless you've got an oropharyngeal tumor or some such. So the Tulip will basically stabilise the tongue, the floppy bits that always obstruct you, and it basically keeps the airway in alignment. It's directly connected, it's hands-free. But more importantly, because it sits so high up, it's within the glossopharyngeal nerve distribution, and that causes swallowing, not vomiting, not retching, and it can be tolerated in semi-conscious conditions, and that really matters in starved elective. Now, because it's low stimulation, you don't need deep anesthesia. You don't need to deepen the patient in order to get them to tolerate the LMA or the eye gel. So they actually are much more stable, much peaceful. I'm not sure if peaceful is the word, but they're much more controlled, less irritable, due to the lighter tulip being able to be tolerated in the lighter planes of consciousness. Okay, so this is predictable. You can put it in early, you can take it out late. You don't need to kind of over anesthetize to get them to tolerate a tulip. Now, let's call it a calmer airway environment. But you want control. One thing I always thought to myself is that if my lists are exciting, then that's not great. So tulip reduces that stimulation. It reduces the amount of times you need to go in and out with different airways. Like, for example, if you're going to use an LMA and eye gel, I'll show you a bit later, but I do things perhaps, just to reduce the risks. But the tulip basically reduces the number of transitions that you need to go through in order to control your patient for that list. Now, of course, if you're replacing a Guerdelin face mask, you've got that additional benefits of being hands-free, the stability. A Guerdelin face mask, I've seen it not work. Real trouble. If you can't get that to work and the patient is too light to accept an LMA or an eye gel, you're in some proper trouble. But once the tulip is in place, it's stable. It's delivering up to 250% more oxygen than a Guerdelin face mask, because it's only got 10% of the dead space for starters. It's directly connected, and it gives you larger tidal volumes, so that you've got stability at a very early stage. Now, the additional thing is that tulip actually reduces regurgitation risk. It gives you higher tidal volumes but lower peak ventilation pressures, because it has a very wide airway tube. The ventilation is also, of course, afforded by the full seal that usually never leaks, and if it does, inflate it and it will stop. But that means you get the benefits of lower ventilation pressures during untroubled times, but you also get the benefit of much higher IPPV performance if you're in a proper emergency. If a patient gets laryngospasm for some other reason, it won't be a tulip because it's too high up. And then if it's proper trouble, then you can even intubate through it. And I think perhaps the biggest core advantage of a tulip, it being so low stimulation, it being tolerable in semi-conscious condition, allows fully awake self-extubation. Now, I must remind you, that's with the cuff inflated. You don't need to touch it. Basically, this is a critical safety step, and it also saves a great deal of time for both the anaesthetist and the recovery staff. When the patient pulls it out, and you can see that on the recovery video 2.1 on the Tulip website or on YouTube, basically the patient will have a full return of airway reflexes. You can watch the patient cough, you can watch the patient swallow. You probably agree that the patient's GCS is 14. So that then gives you reduced risks of emergence with every single anaesthetic. It removes the possibility of death at that late stage. I mean, I'm not saying it's entirely impossible, but it considerably removes most of the risk. Now, in situations of like ENT, dental, nasal, orofacial, etc., in two of the other videos, I take you through the ENT type tulips, the ophthalmology tulips, and with the ENT tulips, there's absolutely no need for intubation or neuromuscular blockade, because the airtight cuff is also blood tight. That's been demonstrated and proven using methylene dye and scopes. So basically, that removal of the requirement for intubation then, of course, removes the need for intubation, but also extubation, and they are two very separate things, and they are two different separate risks. There's, of course, if you're not paralysing, there's no risk of that. There's no risk of the reversal, and then that considerably safens both the emergence and the extubation. Now, let's go through the anaesthetic itself. Okay, so the stages are pre-oxygenation and monitoring. You're setting up. Induction, let's say it's fentanyl and propofol. Then, of course, there's the maintenance, the anaesthetic and the surgery itself. Then there's recovery in theatres, then there's recovery in recovery. So, for starved elective anaesthesia, let's consider you're thinking of using a tulip instead of an LMA and eye gel, something you normally do. You would pre-oxygenate and monitor. But you just need a normal face mask. You don't need a cushion face mask because you're not going to ventilate using a Goodell, so you don't need that. But basically, you won't need it for recovery either. But I'm going to just say this out loud. I take out LMAs and iGels deep because I hate it when the patients self-extubate with that. They bite. It's just horrible. You know, you think you're going to pull people's teeth out. So you don't need a cushion face mask on induction. All right, when you're going to use a Tulip, because you're not going to need one on recovery. All right, so you don't need two sets of kit. You don't need a Goodell face mask, iGel, or LMA. But again, that's based on the methodology of taking out an iGel LMA deep so they don't bite. So once you've induced with fentanyl, propofol, you know, once you've pre-oxygenated with a normal mask, put the Tulip state in. All right, so you're going to need to insert it. You're going to need to inflate it, but use a 60ml syringe, all right? Don't use a 20ml syringe 3 times. You will get it wrong. You won't know how much is in it. You'll have underinflated it, all sorts of things. It's quite easy, much faster. Use a 60. Now, when you're connecting it, personally, I always hold the airway, connect it, ventilate, test it, then secure it, but I keep holding it. All right. Now, with the Tulip, if I start with elective anaesthesia, it has a headband to add its stability. The J shape, the L shape, the 90-degree bend holds the Tulip in place. The headband just, makes that better for you. You don't need to cut a head tie, and it's for stability and starved elective anaesthesia. Ambulances as well, you understand. So, the important thing for the surgery itself is the catheter mount. All right, the Tulip is small, it's lightweight, you can twist it easily. I mean, a Tulip weighs much less than the anaesthetic circuit. I mean, a Tulip weighs about 25 grams. It's about 1/5 of the weight of an iGel. So, catheter mount mounted north. Basically, you want to mount it centrally and you want to mount it symmetrically so that it doesn't cause any twisting of the airway itself. So avoid traction, avoid displacement, because again, Tulip is tiny. It's not like an iGel. It's not the size of my shoe. So now let's talk about recovery in theatres. Okay, basically I remove laryngeal masks and iGels deep because it prevents patients biting on the tube. So there's no risk of obstruction, there's no risk of dental damage if you take it out deep. That's what I do. Now, but the point is recovery in theatres, you leave the Tulip in place. You don't touch it. You don't do anything now. You leave it fully inflated. You don't need to remove an iGel. You don't need to remove an LMA. You don't need to, reintroduce a Goodell and face mask like I would do if I'm using an iGel. You don't need a second airway with the Tulip. All right, so that reduces the intervention, the insecurity, the moments of transition, but it also reduces costs, which is, no bad thing. Now, the whole point is, you take the patient to recovery, fully stable, they're ventilated, etc. They can breathe spontaneously. You've got an airway in place. There's no danger. You take them to recovery, and again, that critical time-saving step, right? That critical safety step is you allow the patient to self-extubate when they're fully awake. Again, the cuff is, Tulip cuff is fully inflated. You don't touch it. The patient will pull it out when they're ready. GCS 14, you don't have to hold a mask. There's no second airway. There's no instability. Patient wakes up. So during that transitional period, theatre recovery, you've still got directly connected IPV airway with 100% oxygen. All right, so you've got ventilation ability until the last moment. Additionally, the Tulip doesn't obstruct when you pull it out because the flexible tube straightens and the cuff keeps the tube central. So you don't obstruct with the Tulip if you leave the cuff fully inflated because the cuff holds the tube in the center. Now, that basically demonstrates the Tulip is, it's simpler, it's safer, and it's also cheaper. Now, cheap isn't part of my plan, but, that's okay. So what do you do now? If you're thinking about using a Tulip, you simply replace an LMA and an iGel like for like with the Tulip. But the only difference is the recovery side. Of course, you don't need the cushion for a face mask at the beginning or the end, so there's that. But you allow fully awake self-extubation with a cuff fully inflated, and that really is your biggest possible benefit on the recovery side. But what do you do now? Basically, I recommend, if you're clinical, then you've got to do the decent thing. You've got to read the studies, convince yourself that what I'm telling you is true. The evidence is there. It's about whether you've read it or not. I recommend you watch training video number 1 and 2. just helps. And then basically just get an understanding of the correct sizes. Now, just so you know, for adults it's green, orange and red. That's the UK Gittel equivalent. So size 2 is a green, small adult, average female. Orange size 3 is a medium adult. I'll call that an average male. That's probably me. And red size 4, large adult. So somebody's taller than me, more than 6'2". Basically, what's your process? The inflation volume is printed on every tube. Every size has a slightly different volume. It's all printed, you don't have to memorize anything, but I recommend you use that 60 mils syringe. In fact, I think that's pretty much mandatory. You're going to make a mistake. The important point is you keep the cuff pressure between around 40 millimeters of mercury. All right, so that's mucosal perfusion pressure, 50 centimeters of water. If you overinflate, there's a danger that you could, compromise the blood flow of the tongue, but you'd be able to see that. But, you can feel it between finger and thumb. It is the softest cuff of any airway device. So what I recommend you do is you use a size 2, which is a green one, female size, or an orange size 3, male size, but in a mannequin. All right, you mess around, inflate it, use that 60 ml syringe. You'll see it does everything it's supposed to do. Then proceed. So this is the Tulip Airway. We'll be releasing another video in about another 10 days or so. We'll let you know.